Hello, guys. This is Mrs. Dunlop, and this is chapter 3. And I know it says India and China, but really we're just looking at China, sections 3 and 4. And you guys will have the opportunity to laugh out loud as I try and pronounce crazy names that have nothing to do with our alphabet. So sit back, relax, enjoy the conversation that is going to be one way because you'll just be listening to me. As you look at this basic overview of chapter 3, section 3, which begins on page 88 in your book. And yes, I do expect you to read it to help you answer the questions. Historians traditionally consider the founding of the Shai dynasty over 4,000 years ago as the beginning of Chinese civilization. It was replaced by the Shang dynasty, in which aristocratic warlords helped govern the vast kingdom, while peasants farmed the land. Same story, different country, huh? The successors to the Shang dynasty were, of course, the dynasty that you are looking at right there, which is known as the Zhao dynasty, who claimed to rule by something called the Mandate of Heaven, and you guys will need to become familiar with that. Under the Zhao, irrigation and improved farming methods led to an increased food production, which the population grew, and manufacturing and trade increased. The Zhao dynasty collapsed after powerful states emerged within the kingdom, equipped with cavalry and advanced weapons. Toward the end of the Zhao dynasty, three major Chinese philosophies developed, or call them religions. Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism focused on the immediate world and offered alternative paths to an orderly society. All right, next slide. You guys can kind of look at the pictures as I go through this. Early Chinese civilization. Okay, so what you guys are looking at, that basically begins the geography of China. This begins on page 88. So the geography of China, there are two major rivers, the Yellow River and the Yangtze River. And you can see the yellow is the Huanghe, and the Yangtze is right there in front of you. 10% is suitable for farming. We use approximately 19% of the United States. And there are oceans and mountains which basically isolated China. You guys can see these massive Himalayan mountain ranges. Up to the north where you see Mongolia, it actually gets quite cold. That's up towards, if you go west, Siberia, known for its cold. And you guys can see my picture shows you how long the Yellow River is and the Yangtze and where they're located and where they empty into the Yellow Sea. Now, the Shang dynasty, it's right there. It says the Shai dynasty is thought to be the first, as I read to you. The Shang dynasty, given the dates, farmers ruled by aristocracy. There was an upper class whose wealth is based on land, as it is still to this day, it seems like, in the world. And power would be passed on from parent to child. There were 5 capital cities with walls, royal palaces, and royal tombs. And there were political and social structures for this, of course. We are on to page 90. And you could see there was a king that ruled from Nyongyang, who controlled the armies. The territories were governed by warlords. And they communicated with the gods using bones. And you guys could see some of these bones there in the picture as well as in your book, known as oracle bones. They were inscribed with questions and answers. Then they were preserved in the king's records. So it's kind of fascinating that they would use those oracle bones, the kings would, to ask questions. Okay? All right. And here we have the early Chinese civilization section 3. And we have the Zhao dynasty overthrow the Shang to set up their own dynasty in 1027 BC. They expanded their actions by claiming the Mandate of Heaven or divine rule. The Mandate of Heaven was later used to explain the dynastic cycle. In your book, it says, what was the Mandate of Heaven? It was believed that heaven, which was an impersonal law of nature, kept order in the universe through the Zhao king. Thus he ruled over all humanity by the mandate or authority to command from heaven. The king who was chosen to rule because of his talent and virtue was then responsible for ruling the people with goodness and efficiency. The concept was a heavenly mandate, became the basic principle of Chinese statecraft. A dynasty, as you can see there, would remain in power only as long as it was providing good government. When a dynasty went into decline and began to abuse its power, it was said to lose the mandate of heaven or favor of the gods. A strong leader would usually emerge to claim the mandate of heaven and establish a new dynasty. The dynastic cycle would then begin again. The Tao, or way, how the king was expected to rule, his duty was to keep the gods pleased. You guys can keep looking at the center where the dynastic cycle is represented. Under the Zhao, the Chinese discovered how to make silk from cocoons. The silkworms would become China's most valuable export, eventually linking them with most of the world through trade. Chinese artisans also excelled in bookmaking. The first books were made by binding together long, thin strips of wood or bamboo. Chinese scholars would then carefully paint characters on with brush and ink. Early book, the Book of Songs, which includes poetry describing a variety of Chinese life. You guys will, of course, be basically reading that, or I'm sorry, you'll be reading a piece of that. The mandate of heaven is something that I do want you guys to pay attention to because it is pretty fascinating, and the dynastic cycle. You guys can see the silkworm life cycle there as well. They are moths at one point. Okay, so sometimes I feel like I'm running, trying to get through all this information. So remember, guys, read your book. This stuff is found on page 91. I have time limits on each slide, so that's why I feel a bit rushed. So we have the fall of the Zhao dynasty. Rulers began to decline intellectually and morally, as we see with many states when morality starts to suffer because there's maybe nothing to concentrate on. City-states became stronger and challenged the ruler with civil war. Fighting changed because of iron weapons, cavalry, crossbows, which were invented in China, always remember that, and the Qin took control. So we have another dynasty taking control. Now we have the life during the Zhao dynasty, just so we know. Land ownership with peasants working the land owned by the lord, hence the term landlord. Towns had merchants who were owned. Isn't that the craziest thing? They were kind of like slaves, and there was, of course, trade. So you guys can kind of see some of those different things. The family in ancient China, it was basic economic social unit, filial piety. Son or daughter gives up personal needs to serve the male family head. I kind of like this idea, I think. What do you guys think? Well, you probably don't like it right now because you're not in charge of your family, but coming at it as a parent sounds pretty good. Farming required the entire family. Then sons took over. Men were the head of all. Oh, not again. Women were subordinates. Never like hearing that in history. But in the royal family, women did have some influence. Okay, that was on page 93. Life of the Zhao was on page 92 and 93. The economic and technological growth, that's 93. 6th and 3rd century were a time of growth. Irrigation controlled water. If you can control water, you can increase your you can obviously increase your food production. Food production increases how many people need to work the land. Therefore, you get more food, you get more people, you have more people, so it indirectly, irrigation and food production increase our population. Increased food and silk was traded. The Chinese written language, primary pictographic, which are picture symbols, kind of when we are looking at hieroglyphics, or ideographic, which is a combination of 2 or more pictographs to represent an idea. East, for example, pictured there, symbolizes the sun coming up behind the trees. I guess you could kind of see that in that picture there to the left. Most language went on using the symbols that represented phonics. China, we went on to use phonics. They never did. China has never completely abandoned using pictures. So that's kind of unique to the Chinese culture. I mean, in Egypt, they, of course, use Arabic. They do not use hieroglyphics still. because it obviously seems very cumbersome to take so much time to write. I mean, it's beautiful, but to write a character like that. Okay, so next slide. Zhou Dynasty. Sorry. What we're looking at is early Chinese civilization, Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism. And yes, it said that these were kind of like thoughts or ideas, but basically they pretty much are religions as well. And so a real man, Confucius, that wanted to be a political advisor, he was called the Master Kung. The first teacher is what that meant. His thoughts were recorded in the Analects. His interest in philosophy was political and ethical, but not spiritual. He felt that a person should behave in the way of the Tao, and the government could be run by superior men. That just means not by rulers or a particular family or anything like that. So this made Confucianism, or a system of Confucius ideas, important part of Chinese history. You guys can see down at the bottom, duty and humanity are a huge piece of Confucianism. Duty, all people had to set aside their needs for the family and society, work hard, and improve life on earth. Compassion and empathy for others measures the feelings of others by one's own. So you can see how important that is. Taoism, based on the teaching of Laozi, Old Master, lived at the same time as Confucius. The way of the Tao are the writings of Taoism. Does not care about the concerns of the universe, where we came from, creationism, evolutionism, stuff like that, but looks at how we should act while we are here. To follow the will of heaven is to do nothing, act spontaneously, and let nature take its course. So we are basically on page 96, and there are readings there that you guys can look at, and it talks about Taoism. Without going outside, you may know the whole world. Without looking through a window, you may see the ways of heaven. The farther you go, the less you know. Thus, the sage, wise man, knows without traveling. He sees without looking. He works without doing. I'm sure you guys can argue that one. Legalism. Unlike those, this said that humans were evil, and we could only be on the correct path if given harsh laws to follow with punishments. Wanted a system of impersonal laws rulers needed to use to create order because people were not capable of being good. Fear of punishment would cause people to serve. Very interesting. If you guys could see the symbols from those. Simply put, it seems that Confucius was more interested in how to get what one wants out of life and how to behave in society, whereas in contrast with Confucius, Laozi was more interested in being in harmony with the world around him. So you guys can see the differences in how a government could easily use legalism to control people, because if it gave those harsh laws and looked at you as bad, then it had a way of controlling the population. Lead the people by virtue and restrain them by the rules of good taste, and the people will have a sense of shame and moreover will become good. Imagine that. You guys can probably have a healthy argument over that if we were in a traditional classroom. Okay. So we're on section 4, but I do want you guys to really revisit section 3 and make sure that you do really look at the different Chinese thoughts or religions, 95 to 97, because it's going to break down those three different ideas of Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism. Amazingly, Buddhism is not there. It did come out of India and into China, which now it's probably the most predominant religion or faith or thought or whatever you want to call it in China. But again, Buddhism did start in India, and so that section we were primarily looking at what was going on in China at that time. So this slide, from about 400 to 200 BC, powerful Chinese states engaged in bloody civil war. The state of Qin eventually defeated its rivals, and its young leader, Qin Shi, I'm just going to go with that as a shortening, declared a new dynasty. The Qin adopted legalism, of course, as his guiding principle, and political power became more centralized and bureaucratic. The emperor created a monetary system and built a vast network of roads. He also expanded the empire and started the building of the Great Wall of China, one of the 7 man-made wonders of the world. However, civil war broke out again after Qin's death. Under the Han Dynasty, China became more stable. The Hans adopted Confucianism rather than legalism as their guiding principle, yet they built on many of Qin's bureaucratic innovations. New technologies and innovations such as paper and steel brought prosperity. Advances in shipbuilding, the rudder, led to overseas trade. However, many free peasants did not share in the prosperity and were forced to sell their land and become tenant farmers. Peasant uprisings, along with political intrigue, helped bring about the end of the dynasty. So that is the beginning of section 4. Section 4, Rise and Fall of Chinese Empires. The Qin dynasty ruler Qin Shi, the first Qin emperor, is what that means. So again, we are on page 99. Changes under the Qin dynasty. Legalism was adopted by the rulers as its ideology, and they had centralized governments with 3 parts: a civil division, military, and censorate, which had inspectors who checked on the government officials. Provinces and counties came at this point. They had adopted positions. Censors watched these officials. If you're looking at the map, you can see where the in the north there, north of Beijing, where the Great Wall of China was. The Qin also had a strong foreign policy and extended its borders far south towards Vietnam. The Great Wall. Okay, so page 99. The Qin Emperor's major foreign concern was the north. In the vicinity of the Gobi Desert, there resided a nomadic people known as the Xiongnu, mounted on their horses. The Xiongnu ranged far and wide in search of pastures for their flocks of cattle and sheep. So, how do we keep them out? Build a big wall. So you guys can see the wall of 10,000 li, a li was a third of a mile, is the Great Wall of China, which does get extended. The fall of the Qin dynasty. After the first ruler, the dynasty was overthrown, followed by a civil war. Not a very long dynasty. So as you guys can see there, what do you take away from the Qin dynasty? Well, that they did create this 3 civil war government, that they did begin building the Great Wall of China, something extremely important. And of course that they chose to use legalism. In this particular picture, you guys can see the map of this particular dynasty, and you can see how big it was. You can see where that Gobi area is up there. The Gobi Desert is actually not a desert like the desert that you live in. All right, this particular picture is from page 100 in your book. You will see when we look at the map of the Han Dynasty how much further the Great Wall of China does end up being. All right. Hope this gives you guys a good visual of what's happening. So, section 4, the rise and fall of Chinese empires. Now we're on to the Han Dynasty. Han Gaozu ruler. And we are on page, well, kind of 101, really, if you look at it. The political structure got rid of that legalism and harsh political policies, but kept the division of central government into 3 ministries, military, civil, and censorate. Established a civil service exam to train candidates. I think that we have stuff like that here. And with the expansion of the empire, stretched to northern Vietnam and had to push the nomads back beyond the Great Wall again. Okay. Provided a strong central government, the Han emperors continued to expand Chinese empire. Along the coast of the South China Sea, part of what is today northern Vietnam became a part of the empire. They also went westward into Asia, extending Chinese boundary there. Han Wudi also had a great deal with the Xiongnu, the nomads beyond the Great Wall. His armies drove them back. Okay, in society of the great Han Empire, prosperity, but free peasants began to suffer. Landowners had forced military service and forced labor. The population did triple. A cycle began with smaller peasant farmers becoming tenants, which means they don't own their land, and then forcing free farmers to become tenants, and as they used private armies to bully them into these groups. So you can see that that particular concept of being free was kind of starting to wither away. And as you can see on this picture from page 101 in your book, no, you can't, because I just moved something and not this particular slide. There you go. So the map of the Han Dynasty, you guys can see how it is extended. Regions under the Han Protectorate, the Han Empire's greatest extent. The Great Wall is a little bit bigger, and you can see the modern day border. Still see those Himalayas, and where the north, southeast, west, that of course is India. Technology under the Han Empire, improvement in textile manufacturing, and of course watermills. I know this sounds strange, but if you have a watermill and it can grind grains more frequently, then that turns those grains into things such as breads. And what that does is that, again, increases your ability to produce food. And you're not doing it by hand, you're having watermills do it. The paper was invented, and rudders for ships. So apparently you didn't just have to sail with the wind, you can go where you'd like to go against the wind. And with every great rise of an empire, there is a fall. Oh, by the way, that's a picture of paper, and then that is the Han Dynasty written in modern terms and then in ancient Chinese terms there in the center. Officials became corrupt. I'm sure their morality died. Rulers became bored and spent money on entertaining themselves and not taking care of the kingdom. So, as I have told you before, we see this rise and fall, rise and fall, rise and fall. It seems to, quite often we see wars associated with it, power, take away power. That is world history, and you will see it quite frequently. One of the unique things that came out of these two in section 3 and 4, the Qin Dynasty in particular in section 4, you guys see that picture to the right? So if you look in your books, it talks on page 103, and I've seen these pictures before. It's amazing. This was in a burial, like a tomb. And you talk about what we find in King Tut's tomb. Well, as you guys can see, school children began to read complications of that. We'll go down. It says the burial ground of Shi contained more than 6,000 terracotta soldiers and even horses, chariots, and 7,000 bronze weapons. They were slightly larger than life size, and they were each given different faces. So one of the burial grounds of 4 had 6,000 of these terracotta figures. Just absolutely amazing. And so you guys can look that up, and you guys can do some research on it because it is absolutely fascinating. So on this, we see the conclusion slide, and it is from the back of your book. I do like to take pictures. It's from page 104. It says, Chinese and Indian civilizations are remarkable for their achievement and innovation. This chart shows their accomplishment in several areas. So as you guys can see, sections 1 and 2 were India, sections 3 and 4 were China. So that's the country. And then we see the religion and philosophy, and we're looking at it at the time period in which we're studying. So we see Hinduism and Buddhism in India, Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism in China. The people, Siddhartha, of course, began Buddhism, Ashoka and Chandragupta II. And then down below, we see Confucius, Laozi, and Qin Shi. What were the innovations? Well, we have the iron plow, the caste system, kind of sad, the concept of zero, and the decimal system. And then we have bronze casting, the crossbow, paper, iron plowshare, and silk. So you guys should really kind of know, if you're asked, playing Jeopardy in the afternoon, where did this come from? You'll now know the difference between India and China. Literature. You can read those, and the Vedas. And then down in China, we have the Analects, the Confucian classics, which were Tao Te Ching, and, of course, poetry. Government and society looks the same. As a woman, I always wonder, when are women taking over? Remember, world history is made up of power struggles over religion, land, money, resources, causing war. Why? Because one person wants what the other person has, and therefore they find a way to take it. So, guys, I hope that this has helped. You've had 2 PowerPoint presentations to explain all of Chapter 3. You will have plenty of time to do your work, approximately 2 weeks to work on this. Please take the time to use your interests. If you see something that's interesting, Google it, do a search on it, find a different site and look at something, watch a video, do whatever you guys can, because this stuff is interesting, but it is only as interesting as we all make it together. And if you find something fascinating, share it with me, and maybe I'll be able to put it up in my Moodle account. Thanks for listening.